inquiry at land to the west of Wyerston Road, Ashbourne, Derbyshire. We're going to finish cross-examination of Mr. Carey this morning. But before we do, just 2 points to pick up from yesterday. First of all, Mr. Hunter, the LPA's reason for refusal 7. Have you had a chance to have a think about that?
Suggested yesterday is correct in its terms. Its objection to the incomplete nature of it and the risk posed by the balancing pond. Yeah, those elements are gone if the proposal is now to remove it. There's obviously issues about whether its effect on accessibility, but they come in under, I think, reason for refusal 2. So yes, so it doesn't remove all issues, but it does remove the issues highlighted in reason for refusal 7.
Yeah, that just narrows things for me, so that's helpful. Thank you. So I can note that you're no longer pursuing reason for refusal 7.
No, in light of the removal of the proposal.
Lovely, thank you.
There were 2 other preliminary matters I wanted to raise with you, but obviously I'll do that at the appropriate moment.
Okay, the only other thing I was going to raise was just that folder of plans for approval. Is that coming together? Oh, lovely. Thanks. Has everybody got access to those?
Yes. They're in the core documents, yeah. I mean, in terms of
right.
Yeah. In terms of the list of plans, Marm, and everybody else, this is the list of plans that's in the agreed conditions. I think it's core document 7.18. So that's just the updated plans from that. And just to say really briefly, Marm, the only change is the removal of the footpath and just making sure the details are consistent across all the plans. That's all it is.
Yeah. That's important for me to see. Thank you. That's me then. So, Mr. Hunter, your preliminary matters.
Thank you, Ma'am. The first one was something that arose in cross-examination yesterday. You got one of the questions, or a set of questions to Mr. Carey, were about the improvements proposed improvements to the Station Street 5-arm junction in the one-way system. And it was said that that's been implemented. I've been instructed that that's partly correct and partly incorrect. So the position on the basis of my instructions, I raised it with Ms. Oakley earlier on, I think she's okay with me raising it with you, is that that there has been a partial implementation of there was already, I think, some one-way system, and it's shown on there. I think some of the system on Dig Street was made one-way in COVID, in the pandemic period. The rest of it is still unimplemented. That's not been taken forward.
That's helpful, thank you.
And the second thing was a matter of timetabling. Looking at the timetable, and again, I've spoken briefly with Ms. Ogley about it just before we started. My view was, looking at this, we are not going to realistically do all of this today, with Mr. Carey in particular having the remainder of cross-examination, re-examination. And my suggestion was that, looking at it realistically, I think we will get through the highways evidence. We will hopefully get started with Mr. Lally and do examination in chief, but I don't think there's any realistic chance that we will, given the estimates, that we'll complete cross-examination. And also, so I don't think even if we sat till 5:30 we'd do that. But my strong preference, for a number of reasons, would be not to. We started early, so it's a very long day. It's always difficult for everybody at the end of the day to pay as much attention. So my suggestion would be to sort of just take the view now that we're going to, if we can, do Mr. Lally in chief, then stop for cross-examination. Where that takes us for tomorrow, I think again what it means is we should get all of the design evidence, that is Mr. Lally and Mr. Carr, done. There is the potential, though, that there might not be, it depends on what time that you wish to rise as well, I suppose, that we might not get Mr. Jackson done. I think if to get Mr. Jackson done, we'll be sitting a full day or maybe a little bit late, possibly. And so it was just to canvass views on whether or not actually Mr. Jackson might be stood down and told to come back next week, because there is, looking at next week, we have got the big slack appears to be on day 7, and I was just going to know, I think we currently have costs for that day, but not, I was going to, the normal order, I mean, I don't have a strong preference, but normally it comes after closing submissions, and we could do it on after closing submissions. So as I'm probably going to have a few questions from Mr. Jackson, but not a great deal, consistently with my client's position that we're not running a landscape case. So my suggestion would possibly be that we aim to do all of the urban design evidence and consider whether Mr. Jackson should be stood down or not. I mean, he could be on standby, but it might just make sense to put him into the next week and make adjustments accordingly.
Thank you. Yep, that all sounds sensible. Ms. Olding.
That all sounds sensible to me, ma'am. And of course, on costs, it depends how you want to deal with that, but we could deal with it in writing. It probably not so much for closings, but costs we could deal with in writing, which will save inquiry time. Yeah.
I'm happy to move costs. You're right, it would make more sense to put it there. I put on the timetable possibly for day 8 to be virtual. Is everybody happy with that? To save
Yes,
the
ma'am.
travel,
Yeah, that's
for
fine.
one day. So then we've got more time because we're not travelling home on that day. So yes, we can do costs and closing, and I can probably rejig it so we can slot Mr. Jackson in. So apologies, Mr. Jackson, for messing you about, if he's here. No. Leave that
I
with me then.
suspect he might have anticipated it. I think they were having a look at where we were up to with proceedings yesterday virtually. I've been keeping an eye on.
Okay, good. All right, leave that with me and I'll rejig it and send a revised timetable out. Right, any matters from you, Ms. Obley?
Nothing from me, ma'am.
All right, well, when you're ready then, if there's nothing further, we'll continue cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Carey.
Good morning, Ms. Ogley.
Hopefully it won't be too long, but there are just some things that I want to pick up and deal with respect to, firstly, the general approach to transport assessments, and secondly, just to touch again on the 5-arm junction. Obviously, we dealt with that in part yesterday, the Staunton Road junction, but I do want to just come back to that and look at it in a bit more detail. So again, let's see if we can kind of deal with some of the easy bits first. We'll see. Would you agree that transport assessments should be proportionate?
Yes.
And that proportionality should be related to the size and the scope of the development to which they are assessing?
Principally, yes.
And do you agree, yesterday we spoke about the approach that Mr. Price has taken to assessment, and I said he's not made any allowance for modal shift, and you said quite fairly, I'm not sure, and I said, well, I'll ask Mr. Price to confirm, but just on the point of principle, can I just double check where you stand on this? It's right, isn't it, that transport assessments can consider impacts net of any reductions for modal shift as a result of travel plans being implemented?
Yes.
Can you pick up Mr. Price's rebuttal, please?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you could just turn to page 11, and it's paragraph 2.25. Page 11, sorry, paragraph 2.25.
I have that, yes.
Now, this is a curious thing about highway assessment, Mr. Carey, because it's fair to say, isn't it, that most professionals still refer to the guidance on transport assessment because there's nothing else, even though it's sort of officially withdrawn. That's kind of what we all use still, isn't it?
it's one of many documents that we refer to that may have been withdrawn that still stand the test of time, yes.
Yeah. And so what Mr. Price is telling us there is that the reason why, or one of the reasons why, apart from agreeing it with the Highway Authority, that this 5-arm junction that is located Sturston Road, Compton Street, Station Street, Old Hill, Derby Road, the reason it wasn't originally assessed is because it was less, the movements that were predicted to go in that direction from this development were less than the usual threshold that's applied in Goethe. So that you don't take any issue with Goethe being used in that way, do you?
Only so much as that the quoted reference doesn't include the full statement from paragraph 2.11, which says that it may not be needed. I think it's important that we read the whole paragraph of 2.11 in that context. It is, it's not an absolute position.
Would you say it's an appropriate judgment call for a highway authority in determining the scope of a transport assessment?
Looking at taking into context, obviously any transport assessment needs to be a proportion, as you've already highlighted. I think the appendix that's referenced, Appendix B that's referenced, does look at the scale of the development and dwellings, and I think it's row 13 on that talks about the number of dwellings, and it makes it clear that greater than, I'd have to go double check the numbers, but it does suggest that a transport assessment is required for the number of dwellings associated with that development.
Oh, I don't think there's any point between us that there needs to be a TA. I mean, there is a TA, isn't there?
Yes.
The point is about the scope of the study area, and the question is, it's proportionate and entirely reasonable, isn't it, for that study area to be decided by the Highway Authority in collaboration with the appellant, having regard to things like the part of Goethe that says, well, you don't really need to look at it if you below two-way trips at 32-way trips. It's a threshold, isn't it? It's an indicator to give you an idea on proportionality.
I agree it's an indicator, but again, I think we discussed this at length yesterday, that specific sites, and I think that's what Goethe, apologies, I'm not used to that reference, but Goethe it alludes to there, it may not be needed, and therefore I still would expect some form of screening or scoping assessment to look at known pinch points and issues in the area that may be a consequence of the development.
Inquiry document 6, if you could just turn that up, you still have that available to you. It's the little extract from Linsig.
Yes.
I just want to understand, so if we just if we keep that in front of us and then we go to page 13 of Mr. Price's rebuttal, where we have table 2.6.
Yes, I have both.
Yeah, okay, great. So, first point then, what this is telling us in terms of the definition, so if we're in IQ6, first bullet point on the page, in effect, degree of saturation. So what it's telling us is that it's going to display in red if it's greater than 90%, because 90% is generally taken as a maximum acceptable degree of saturation for a lane. And I just want to explore this issue about saturation of a lane. So what we can see in table 2.6, if we look at the A515 Sturston Road, which is the one we've all been focusing on obviously already, and we go across to the 2032 future committed development assessment there, what we can see there is that we're not at 90% for that lane, are we?
That's correct.
And whether or not you're at saturation on a lane, that's not to be conflated with the overall performance of a junction, is it?
Saturation on a lane gives an indication of the performance of that part of the junction. I think if that's your question, interpreting the wider junction as a whole. if that's the question.
If we can agree between us that it indicates what's happening on that part of the junction and not the whole junction, is that something we can agree between us?
Yes, I think the rest of the tables indicate obviously how each of the arms perform.
Yes, they do, and they're well under anywhere near the degree of saturation, aren't they, on any assessment?
I think the second row shows 88.3%, so I wouldn't describe that as well under. I would agree that Station Street at 46.7 would be well under, yes.
Okay. So you won't agree well under, but the fact remains that it is indeed below 90%, isn't it?
In respect to that threshold, yes.
Yeah. All arms of the junction.
Yes.
If we just look at what's been set out in the table, so obviously we've got three main timing temporal elements. So we've got the baseline, we've got 2032 with future and committed, and then we've got 2032 future committed and development. But for each of those we're given, firstly, the degree of saturation, but then we're also given the mean max Q, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, and the mean max Q is basically the average of the maximum, isn't it? I mean, that's just literally what it means.
Yes.
And so we can be clear, can't we, that an average maximum effectively represents a realistic worst case, doesn't it?
No, I don't think you can. It's a modelling output, so I don't think you could make the assertion that it's a realistic worst case. It is by its nature, it is a modelled outcome.
The simple point is that when we're looking at mean max Qs, we're not talking about what's going to happen most of the time at the junction, are we?
No, it's obviously in that instance it's referencing the peak hour, and it's the mean max Q length during that peak hour.
That will do for me,
Okay.
Mr. Carey. Just in terms of the horizon year, so obviously what Mr. Price has done is assessed all of the impacts of the developments on all of the junctions that he's looked at in agreement with the Highway Authority, and then of course this additional one, and he's used what 2032 as basically a horizon year. Do you agree with that, just in terms of the approach?
No reason to disagree, no.
This development will be complete within 3 years, won't it, from when the shovel hits the ground?
I take that as read. I couldn't confirm whether it will or won't be, but let's assume it will be for the purposes of this.
So assessing up to 2032 really does add in a lot of conservatism, doesn't it, to Mr. Price's assessments?
Depending on a committed start date, you'd have to assume a start date. If it takes 3 years to complete, then will it be occupied within those 3 years? I can't answer that either as to whether all the properties will be sold and occupied. Therefore, there is obviously clearly a period of time thereafter where occupation may take place. I'm unable to answer that. Presumption of completion of the development shouldn't necessarily lead to the presumption of traffic. It may not be occupied.
Well, I'll ask others who will have considered that question, because potentially, especially when we're in a situation where we've got a shortfall in the 5-year housing supply, but I don't think that's a question for you, Mr. Carey, so I'll pick that up separately.
Mine's from a highways basis in terms of the trip generation.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Price can give his view as well.
Of course.
That's everything that I wanted to pick back up with you, Mr. Carey. So I think having the break overnight was very helpful because it's allowed me to just consolidate. So I'm sorry that meant that you stayed in Perda, but hopefully it saved us time today.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Ms. Audley. Did you want to re-examine, Mr. Hunter?
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Mr. Carey, can I ask you to take up, I think it's inquiry document 5, GG 119. Yes, so we'll ask you first about highway safety questions you asked about yesterday. Could you turn, when you have that, to page 18?
Yes, I have that.
Sorry, can I borrow that? And we see there at paragraph 412, section 412, the design organisation shall manage the production of the RSA response report in collaboration with the overseeing organisation. And I think one of your questions from Ms. Ogley yesterday was, for the purposes of this kind of case, the overseeing organisation is taken to be the highway authority. I think you agreed with that.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I just wanted to ask is, are you aware whether or not the stage 1 report produced by MSR for the appellant was produced in collaboration with the overseeing I beg your pardon, not the report, but a response was produced in collaboration with the overseeing organisation, aka the Highway Authority?
No, I've not seen a document.
Okay. Can I ask you next? You asked questions about what would be required in order to extend the 30 mile per hour speed limit to incorporate the junction in line with the recommendation of MSR, and there was discussions about foliage, the removal of foliage, and you said something about, I don't know enough about this to say what the implications are, whether there might be protected trees and so on. You call that. I just want to ask you about that. Could you look at the core document 2.13, the arboricultural report submitted with the application?
Maybe quick to find a hard copy, if you have one available, please. I have all the documents downloaded. But
Mr. Robson, would you be able to assist with it? Okay,
sorry. I think 2.13, I think Mr. Hunter was referring to arboricultural report.
2.13, yeah.
Can I just check that that's... Apologies. Can I just check that that's the November 2022 ARB report? July.
23, thank you. I have far too many documents open at the moment, and so and on the right pages, and if I oh, but I've got the whole day planned ahead on my laptop. First of all, can you turn to page 18 in that?
Just waiting for the document to...
Oh, sorry, you've not... Sorry, you still...
If you have it to hand, yes. We'll go digital, I think we have.
Sorry, whoever's come to the rescue, thank you. So page 18.
Yes.
When you have that.
Yes.
You got that. Good. Okay. You'll see there's this sort of end of a table listing trees to be retained, trees to be removed in full or part. If you look at the table, you'll see green, category A, high quality value, a number of identified trees and group of trees. and you see none are to be removed in full or part.
Yes, that's what the table says.
Sorry, Mr Hunter, can I just check which table you're in?
It was page 18, going back slightly onto page 17, there's table 3, summary of impact on trees.
Oh, great, yeah, yeah.
And then we see that confirmed in the text, 3 short sections of hedgerows proposed to be removed. All other trees and hedgerows are being retained. 5.5, all category A trees are being retained, including those afforded statutory protection through tree preservation orders. The arboricultural strategy, and we see then 5.6, 3 short sections of hedgerow required to facilitate removal to facilitate the internal spine road, including along the eastern boundary, and so on and so forth. Then can I just ask you to skip ahead to, I don't think it's got page numbers on it, but there are a number of plans at the back after the text, starting on page 25. And if we just go through those in turn.
Yes, I have the first plan.
Yeah,
Yes.
So we've got tree survey plan, and you'll see in the key that category A trees are denoted by green colour with
Yes.
sort of green hatching, and we can see the entrance to the site with an inset and a reference to a further inset plan 1108T04. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we have blue, which denotes, I think, moderate quality, and in a square box in the key we can say that. So the square box means it's hedgerow,
Yes.
and blue means it's moderate quality, and I think that is, well, I just want to, if I might lead on this, because I think this is uncontroversial, that's a section of hedgerow which will be punched through in various places for the access.
Just looking at inset 4 with references H8 bracket B.
Yeah.
I think, yes.
Good. So if we're looking at inset 4, which we see more details of, H8B, correct. And then below that, to the south of that, we have G2A, the Cat A trees, which we're told are being retained. And I just wanted to ask this, so to relate that evidence to your evidence about what might need to be done in order to extend the 30-mile-an-hour limit, and what implications it might have for other aspects of the scheme. So I just wondered if you can help me with that in terms of extending the 30 miles an hour limit. Are you able to say, and if so, please do, if you can't say, please say, whether or not that would have any implications for the trees shown to be retained?
I think if we consider both construction and permanent operation, obviously to build the footpath would require the 2 metres, I think, is the width that has been proposed by the appellant. Working width to enable that wouldn't be unreasonable for another further 1 or 2 metres to be able to build the footway. I would expect that there would be disturbance, although I couldn't categorically say whether that would or would not be the case. I think in a permanent scenario then, to maintain the visibility splay, whilst trimming of the hedgerows might be feasible, long-term strategy may or may not include removal of those trees to enable visibility to be confirmed and maintained. But again, I'm unable to say with confidence, but that would be my view based on the information and the layouts that we've had in front of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, next question. It was put to you that the inspector should give, or has to give, limited weight to what the AME RSA team said, as they're not here to be cross-examined. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't agree. Just want to ask 2 questions. Are the conclusions of the AME RSA team contradicted by the conclusions of the Midland Road Safety RSA team?
No, they're not, no.
Is there any other evidence, apart from the RSAs, which contradicts the contents of the AME RSA?
Not that I'm aware of.
So is there any other evidence that the inspector might prefer that's being given live at the inquiry, that in preference to the AME RSA evidence?
No, I still believe that the road safety audit to be an integral part of the understanding in regard to the safety of the site.
Thank you. Next, it was put to you that what you are seeking here is a counsel of perfection. Can I ask you this, whether or not you think it's reasonable or unreasonable or excessively punctilious to expect a response to an RSA which identifies a safety problem of this nature?
I'm going to have to say I'm not quite sure what punctilious means, if I'm entirely honest with you.
Pedantic or excessively technical?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Mr.
I just
Hunter?
want to ask, it was put to you that what you're seeking is a counsel of perfection. And you've made the point, you said, well, there's been no design response to this. And what I wanted to ask you is whether or not, well, can I just ask you this, is it normal or abnormal or anything else to expect that after a road safety stage 1 audit has been produced, the designer will produce a response?
It's the accepted norm and requirement in order for a designer to respond, in order that there is the confidence that the problem can be resolved at this juncture, rather than taking forward something that therefore may then not be resolvable in the future, in order to give the confidence in the theoretical or engineering design that has been prepared.
Okay. Now, you were next asked about, we know Mr. Price's position. This is something that can be dealt with under Section 78 or Section 278 or 38 with the Highway Authority later. And you were taken to, again, if we go back to GG 119, Inquiry Document 5, I think, you were taken to the tables at the end, the checklists at the end?
Yes.
Or one of them? You were
Yes.
taken one of them. And it was put to you that at least some or many of the matters which are raised in the AMI and possibly also the MSR road safety audit are matters, so you were taken to page 31, local alignment, and it was said, oh, well, the kind of things that are being raised there are in stage 2, the stage 2 checklist box, yeah?
Yes, I recall, yes.
Okay. And you said, well, I think you can consider them at stage 1 and stage 2, I think was where you got to at the end.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to take you to some other parts of the checklists. So if we go on to page 37, so we have B1, local alignment, B2, table B2, general, then B3, junctions, starting on page 37.
Yes.
Could you read the left-hand column, stage 1, could you read the first 2 rows of that? So one's about layout, the other is on visibility. If you just read them to yourself, not out loud.
So I'm just going to confirm the table that you're referencing.
So table B3, page 37,
Yep.
headed junctions.
Yes.
Stage 1, if you just read the entries under stage 1.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. You mentioned yesterday that the key issues raised by the road safety audit or audits are to do with restricted visibility, vehicle speeds, and the topography or physical features of the road here, the crest in particular. I just want to ask, are those things, where are we told those things are to be considered when in the checklist? Are they purely stage 2 matters or not?
No, they're referenced within stage 1. In so much as our visibility space adequate and clear of obstructions, for example.
Thank you. And then, bear with me one moment. If you could go over the page, please, to page 42, table B5, traffic signs, carriageway markings and lighting. And again, same thing, could you look at stage, what the entry for stage 1 in that table, in the checklist?
I have that.
Yeah. So I'll ask you that question. Can I ask you whether or not is this a stage 1 matter or a stage 1 issue to consider what land might be required for signage and other things?
It's a consideration of stage 1 to understand whether there'll be sufficient land for signs or gantries or, yes.
Thank you. Yes, finally, on in relation to highway safety, there is some questions about deterrence of pedestrians using the exit to go south, and you said that isn't something you'd recommend because it causes its own problems of avoidance.
Yes, I mean, depending on the deterrent, if it's a physical barrier on the footway, obviously people can still enter the road to continue their journeys unabated. A deterrent, it's hard to judge without understanding what it is, but a deterrent in its own right may cause a risk and require mitigation in its own.
I just wanted to ask this question, whether or not either Amy's road safety audit team or the Midland Road Safety Audit Team recommended that a deterrent should be placed?
No, it didn't. Neither of the RSAs recommended deterrents.
Thank you. And next then, on to highway impact. And you've obviously been asked questions about this morning. One of them was about, or a set of them was about the degree of saturation. And you were taken to the definition within the SIG user guide. And you were asked, you said, well, the figures we see from a certain road arm or entry into the junction are below 90%, and you agreed. How far below them are they?
Um, 1.1% and 1.7%.
Okay. Well, I'll just ask you this: what implications does that have in terms of if any of the inputs into the modelling turned out to be inaccurate?
Modelling.
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I think I have to object to that, ma'am. We've already dealt with the fact that Mr. Carey accepts what Mr. Price has told him about the modelling and the approach, and that the assumptions are set out in the appendix, and there's been no challenge to that in his evidence in chief or otherwise. I don't think that is procedurally an appropriate point to go into on re-examination.
Well, the reason I'm doing, I think I set out in chief, in opening that as a point, that I think Mr. Carey's evidence in chief was, I'm approaching this on the basis of what Mr. Price says being accurate, but I haven't had the time to go through it and check it and verify it myself. So I'm not really clear about that. I'm just asking, I'm not asking the witness to go back on any of that. We're not saying that what Mr. Price has done is inaccurate, but he's saying I can't comment on that. So it's an area on which this witness isn't giving evidence one way or the other.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, Mr. Price, I just wanted, but I think I'm entitled to ask what, he's not saying it is accurate either, he's saying I'm taking that as an assumption.
And I think that could be left there, but I don't think going further with it is appropriate. I've made the point and it's on the record.
Well,
I think I'm happy to hear the response to that question.
thank you, Ron. So Mr. Kerr, if you would.
I'd probably draw attention to the document, I'm going to say IQ6, the LINSIG manual.
Yeah.
I appreciate the extract is not in front of us, but that same document at section 3.1.1.5 in reference to queuing makes it very clear that queues are inherently difficult to model accurately regardless of the quality or level of detail used in the model, and that predicted queue lengths, I'm reading verbatim here, predicted queue lengths.
I am sorry. This is not an inquiry document, and so look, the point's been raised, and you've been given the opportunity to comment. Fine, but I do think that I need to see a copy of what you're referring to.
It's the same document that you shared as
Yeah,
an
but it's
extract.
not before the inquiry, Mr Carey, so I don't have it.
Well, it's directly linked to the way that you presented your evidence.
But I still need to have it, Mr Carey.
I'm sure your team could provide it to you.
Well, hang on, let's not have a tit for tat. I don't have it, more importantly, because I've only been provided with that.
Appreciate,
That's the
I'm
important
using the
point.
same reference material to
What?
answer the question. It's from the same document.
But I don't have.
I appreciate you don't have the same
Yeah,
document.
so that's the important thing
Okay.
here, not the teams, whether, it's before me. So it is difficult for me if you're referring to something that's not in front of me.
I can answer it without reference to the
If
document.
you answer it
that's
without, if you do that based
I
on
think
your-
if you could just give a general answer.
Yes.
That'd be helpful.
So, modelling is a sensitive exercise. It is reliant on a number of assumptions and assertions, and if we go back to evidence in chief, it did make it clear that obviously the time frame that we had to review the document was limited. I stand by the position and conversation that I had with Mr Price, that based on the way that he provided his evidence, I had no reason to question it based on that limited review, but as a process, modelling is very sensitive to variables, to amendments, to site factors. So yes, it could be amended. It could be sensitive to change.
Okay. Okay. Finally, on this topic, the issue of the one-way system, and if I may, I'm going to put this on the basis that I did it. If I could just check with my learner friend, if she has any objection before I put it like that, I think it is accepted that what I was instructed to say is the position.
I don't think it's accepted insofar as we haven't had a chance to check it ourselves, because
I'll put it on a tentative basis.
But of course, if that is, as a matter of fact, the position, then I'm not going to take any issue about that being drawn to the attention of the inquiry.
Thank you. Okay, on the assumption that what I said to the inquiry on instructions is correct, I just wondered, I think your evidence yesterday was it doesn't make any difference from my perspective, because I was flagging this junction up as one that needed assessment, and that would have been applied whether or not the one-way system had been implemented or not, was I think what you said in essence.
Correct, yes.
I just wanted to ask if what I have said this morning is correct, so not the way it was perhaps put yesterday, but if that is correct, whether that makes any difference to the position either or not.
No, I was slightly confused yesterday, looking at the document as to whether it was or wasn't. So my apologies for not perhaps correcting it yesterday at source. But in terms of the impact of the one-way system, it is still of relevant importance to how well that junction performs.
Okay, thank you. Now, accessibility then, and I just have a couple of questions on that. You were asked a question about MPPF paragraph 108. It may be that I asked Ms Ford again to assist me with this and provide her laptop with the MPPF on. I think because I don't think you had that, and you were given a copy.
I think it was a hard copy that Ms Ford had.
Could you just take that up?
Yes, I have it.
So it was. So if you go to 108.
Yes.
And it was put to you, that's about taking up opportunities to promote sustainable transport. And it was put to you, well, we've done that, we've got a travel plan.
It was, yes.
Okay. Can I ask you to take up Mr Price's proof with that in mind and go to page 14, paragraph 4.51, where he cites a different bit of the MPPF.
Top of page 14.
It could well be. Sorry, just bear with me. There we go. Yes, so he cites paragraph 109, significant development should be focused on locations which can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and affording a general choice of transport modes. And then paragraph 114, what needs to be ensured, appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport modes can be or have been taken up to given the type of development and its location. And then further over the page, 455, 15, page 15, paragraph 117, developments will generate significant amounts of movement should be required to produce a travel plan, and the application should be supported by a transport statement or assessment, so likely impacts can be assessed. And then at page 30, he sets out some evidence on the travel plan. So paragraph 556, page 30.
Yes, I have that.
Yeah. So he says details of local walking routes and directions to the key amenities will be provided to all future residents within welcome packs through the delivery of the travel plan initiatives. The welcome packs will contain maps showing local walking routes in addition to information on how to access local public transport. And my question to you is, to what extent, in the specific circumstances of this case, in your view, will such measures provide genuine or realistic choice for residents in terms of sustainable transport, in particular walking? Will it make a big difference here or not?
Clearly, the provision of information for residents will enable them to understand what facilities are available to them. Will that change the choice in terms of the relationship between the site and those facilities? I think it's unlikely, and therefore probably it'd be welcome information, but little more.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carey.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Price, Mr. Carey will need to vacate and you'll need to make yourself comfortable up there. Should we just take 10 minutes, come back at past? Okay. I think we're all here, so should we push on? Quick point before we come to you, Mr. Price. That occurs to me with Mr. Carey. Now, he did mention air quality in his proof, but that hasn't really come up in evidence in chief or cross-examination. Is that a point that's being pursued by the council?
Sorry, it was. I don't think it was ever intended as a standalone point. It was simply to say if you have more queuing, you have issues with air quality, and this is a junction where there's been some concern about that. But no, we're not pursuing it. It's other than just the obvious. If you have queuing cars, you get issues with air quality.
Ma'am, just for your information, as between the appellant and the authority on that point, that was an issue that we raised when we saw that in Mr. Carey's evidence, and that was the response we were given, and that's why we haven't gone there.
That joins up the circle for me, because I remember it was mentioned in your opening, and I assume that was the case, but it's good to just know for sure. Okay, I've managed to put together a revised timetable, so that should be coming through at some point, so keep your eyes open for it. Hopefully it incorporates the points we discussed this morning. Okay, when you're ready then, welcome Mr. Price to the inquiry and begin examination in chief.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Price, I'll just introduce you to the inquiry. You are Matthew Price, and you have an honours degree in geography from the Manchester Metropolitan University, a master's degree in transport planning from the University of Leeds Institute for Transport Studies. You hold Chartered Transport Planning Professional Accreditation, which is bestowed by the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transport, and you're recognised as a fellow of the same institution. Is that all correct?
It is, yeah.
You're currently an executive director at Hexa Consulting Limited, a multidisciplinary design and engineering practice of civil and structural engineers, transport planners, highway engineers, flood risk and drainage and geo-environmental engineers. You do quite a lot, don't you? Prior to forming Hexa Consulting, you spent 11 years working in the field of transport planning and private sector consultancies, and you were for 8 years in a local authority setting. You've got 20 years of experience in the design and delivery of transport solutions for a wide variety of developments nationally across all scales and sectors, as well as shaping local government planning and design policies and assessing the highways' impacts of nature development proposals. Is that all correct?
It is.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to your evidence then, Mr. Price, again, I think to save inquiry time as much as possible, I'll certainly be suggesting we take the proof and the rebuttal as read. So we'll just go to some of the additional points that we need to focus on. So first of all, can I ask you to start at the beginning and explain how you've been involved in the application proposals, the work that you've undertaken in summary in respect of assessing the transport implications of those proposals, including any engagement with the Highway Authority?
Sure. This might appear more than a summary because we've been involved in this site 2021, something along those lines. Initially, Woodall Homes approached us interested in our services to provide transport planning and highway design support. At that stage, it was looking at the feasibility and viability of the site to see if there is any opportunity for potential development. One of the first things that we looked at was any potential constraints around visibility, particularly to the south of the site, which has so clearly become a theme of this particular inquiry now. Our investigations looked at required visibility in terms of vertical and horizontal alignments and where suitable accessors might be placed along the Wyreston Road frontage. Upon undertaking that service and providing that information to the appellant, we were later appointed to provide ongoing highway design and transport planning support, which included a number of areas, partly shaping the internal configuration of the site in terms of highway alignment and geometry, but principally engaging with Derbyshire County Council as the local highway authority, sharing a transport assessment and travel plan methodology scoping note with them, inviting them to comment on the areas of assessment and also if there's any additional information that they would like us to to explore. Through a culmination...
Can I just stop you there for a moment, Mr. Price? So, just in terms of that engagement you've just described with the Highway Authority, so in terms of the scope of the assessment, the extent of the highway that you were proposing to assess, and indeed any sort of provisions in the travel plan, as I just understand it, just let me be clear, that was all provided to the Highway Authority up front for comment, was it?
Pre-submission.
Pre-submission.
Yes, it was. So this was part of our pre-application engagement work with Derbyshire County Council. From that then, we progressed the preparation and assessment work that supports the production of a transport assessment and travel plan, again working alongside the wider design team and the appellant in the creation of ultimately what was the submitted application. Following submission of the application, we then embarked upon a series of detailed engagement sessions with Derbyshire County Council highways officers, again exploring areas specific to junction capacity, future year modelling scenarios. We also looked in more detail at the opportunities and any potential constraints around visibility, but then also spent quite a lot of time looking at the internal design, configuration and geometry of the carriageways within the site itself. Ultimately arriving at a point of support from the local highways authority, which is reflected in their recommendations for approval.
I'll just stop you there again for a moment. In terms of ultimately, you just used the words ultimately, arriving in the Highway Authority, providing support for the proposals. Can you just give a little bit more flesh to the bones in terms of the degree to which the Highway Authority did engage and asked for things to be looked at, considered, assessed? Can you just give us a bit of a flavour on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So in this particular instance, I would say there was a fairly collaborative approach from the Highway Authority. It's not always the case, unfortunately, when we're involved in certain schemes. But in this instance, Derbyshire County Council were very active participants in the assessment requirements, in sharing what they expected or what they would like to see as part of the evolution of the transport assessment. So we can probably count back about 4 individual sessions over the period of the determination period, where we met with highways officers virtually, but good 2-hour sessions. And again, it wasn't exclusive to highway and highway design. Obviously, there's crossover in some of the issues like street trees and the feel of the design itself. Not something I'm really able to touch on, and others will do a better job than I. But yeah, I'd say it was collaborative and extensive.
That's helpful, thank you. So moving on then from the sort of basics of the overall approach. Obviously, one of the things that we've heard a lot about already, the road safety audits, and we know that we've got 2. We've got one that's been prepared by Amy, and obviously there's one that's at Appendix A to your main proof evidence. Just for clarity, how similar do you say those RSA audits are?
I feel there's quite a lot of discrepancy and difference between them.
And can you elaborate on those discrepancies?
I can, yes. If we take the RSA undertaken by Midlands Road Safety, which was at the request of the appellant, simply put, they issued the drawings, briefed on the circumstances of why the RSA is required, and then they undertook the RSA. What they highlighted was a potential concern around visibility, and that's not a surprise given the themes that are emerging from this particular inquiry. But what they produced was some recommendations or solutions potentially that could address those. The main difference between the RSA produced by Midlands Road Safety and that provided through Amy's evidence document is that the initial road safety undertaken by the appellant seemed to review and consider information provided along the lines of visibility displays. So they made reference to the provision of visibility displays, the fact that they've been developed in line with Manual for Streets and that they appear to be achievable. In the Amy road safety audit, there almost seems to be a presumption that it's not achievable, and that seems to be validated through that body of work like I say, principally through photos which are not particularly accurate, I would suggest, and then some of the diagrams and the figures that they use as well in respect of the amount of tree clearance suggests a level of visibility encroaching into the hedgerow, which is far beyond what is actually required as per the drawings provided.
So just in respect of your evidence about achievability of visibility displays and manual for streets, have you heard anything in the evidence to the inquiry so far that leads you to adopt a different conclusion from that set out in your evidence?
I've not, no.
For the avoidance of doubt, how possible is it to achieve required visibility displays at the access for the site?
Well, based on the assessment work we've done, I would say we've considered all the scenarios robustly to the point that initially our assessment of visibility, viability, if you like, was undertaken using topographical data and OS base maps. The topographical data was necessary to calculate the vertical alignment of the road. We've heard about the potential impact of the crest and how that might serve to obscure forward visibility, either for vehicles travelling north or for vehicles turning out of the access and seeing approaching vehicles. The topographical data and then the resultant calculation of the visibility displays, which is derived from 7 days worth of traffic counts at that particular location, when we apply the methodology, has demonstrated that the visibility displays can be achieved in line with Manual for Streets guidance. So that being the case, we're certain it can be achieved. I mean, again, within the evidence that was provided through Amy and Mr. Carey, there were further questions we could see, so for peace of mind more than anything else, we wanted to go back and actually check it with measuring tapes and photographs. So that's why the site visit was repeated, so to verify the opportunity to achieve suitable visibility, and again the on-site measurements corroborated the topographical data and the OS data, further giving confidence that visibility is achievable.
Thank you. Just turning again to the detail of the AMI RSA, we've been quite a lot to the IQ document 5. Do you have a copy of that available to you,
Yes.
Mr. Price? Hopefully we don't have to go to it in too much detail. We've already looked at quite a few parts of it, but there's a process that involves a number of different organisations, and we know that the overseeing organisation should be the highway authority in a case like this. There's also a design organisation. This is a bit of a trite question, but who is the design organisation in this case?
That would be Hexa.
So in respect of a response to the AMI road safety audit, please, can you just please step us through, as the design organisation, what is your response to the points that have been raised?
Okay, so if we were to prepare a design response in receipt of the AMI road safety audit, as we've heard already yesterday I should say, there are 3 options available to the design team in respect of how to address the problems raised through the RSA. It is either accept the problem and recommendation, it's accept the problem, propose alternative recommendation, or not accept the problem. I don't know if you're wanting me to go through each of the problems point by point and say how we would respond, but in a nutshell, in summary, I would suggest there are no problems that could either not be resolved through detailed design, which is points I've made in our rebuttal, more aligned to a stage 2 RSA, and again we've spoken about opportunities to achieve that through section 278 and section 38 agreement works, which would be developed subject to the outcomes of this appeal. But then there are other elements that refer to the risk of collision and shunting emanating from the AMI RSA. Those problems identified with the AMI RSA are based on an assumption that visibility cannot be achieved because the AMS RSA has not sought to confirm if visibility can be achieved. Therefore, they are problems that we would not agree with and draw the overseeing organisation's attention to the fact that calculated visibility displays are achievable within the confines of the site and adopted highway boundary.
It would be helpful if we could just go through those.
I was going to invite Mr.
Sorry.
Price. No, not at all, Mr. Price. So let's step through your response, please, then to.
I get the overview, obviously, so that is helpful, but it is useful just to be absolutely clear on everything.
Okay.
Absolutely. So have you got the RSA in front of you?
I do.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning with problem 1 on page 6, please. So can you just sort of summarise the point that's being made, and then please provide your response to it.
Excuse me. So problem 1 makes reference to potential for pedestrians to walk in the carriageway if travelling south along Wyeston Road. Our review and response to that is no action required, principally because there is anticipated to be negligible, if any, footfall generated by our development proposals that would be attracted in a southerly direction along Wyeston Road. It's also probably worth mentioning this is a point that was reviewed and accepted by Derbyshire County Council as the Highway Authority as well, because during post-submission determination, the subject was also raised by the Highway Authority. We provided the same review and response, and that was ultimately accepted.
So just let me understand your position a little bit more on that then. What are your reasons for concluding that there will be negligible footfall to the south, please?
All the gravitational attractors within Ashbourne
Gravitational attractors. What does that mean?
Destinations, reasons for people to travel, bus stops, schools, shops, health facilities, local amenities are all access to the north of the site. We may have taken a slightly different view had the footway to the south actually provided a meaningful connection to somewhere or something, but as we've heard already, it's a section of about 40-50 metres in length that starts in a verge and ends on a private residential driveway.
Essentially, it just leads to another property.
It's hard to determine actually from Google Street View what it is. It's a set of private gates which would lead to a private property, we'd assume, yeah.
I'm just scribbling, sorry, Mark. We can then move on to problem 2.
Yep, so problem 2 refers to the vertical alignment of the carriageway, suggesting it significantly restricts visibility to the right, presenting a potential risk of side impact collisions. So this is a reference to vehicles who might be exiting the proposed development site and what level of visibility they would have to their right to see vehicles approaching. Again, there's a couple of photos included within the AMI RSA just to try and contextualise the point they're making there. And it's certainly a point that needs to be explored as we have within the RSA provided by Midlands Road Safety and also, again, through consultation with the Highway Authority. But ultimately, we come back to the position that an achievable level of visibility can be achieved, which is compliant with design standards. And therefore that decision, that problem falls away, in our opinion.
And can you just direct me to there's a plan showing visibility displays, is there? Or is it just been worked out?
No, there is. So again, if we stay within the AMI RSA, so this is Appendix 1, I believe. It's in here somewhere, apologies. Yeah, there is an insert, figure 1.21.
Where's
That's right, yes. And like I said, it's perhaps not very easy to view in a paper copy,
But what is included there is extracts from drawings provided as part of the planning application that shows the required visibility displays to north and south, effectively 42.7 metres to the south or right as you exit the site, and then 58.4 metres to the left or north.
Do I have this plan in a bigger format?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the original plan is appended to the transport assessment, CD.
Sorry, just to assist with the location of the plan, and I've got a full pull-out copy if you need it. It's not marked up. It's CD 2.19, and it's the proposed site access drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CD 2.19. Let's have a look. This looks like one of the conditioned ones. Yes, it is. P1045. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. So yes, basically the AME RSA has looked at the drawings provided as part of the application and used those for the basis of their own assessment.
You should do, ma'am. Just on that point as well, though, in addition to the plan that we've just been referring to for the proposed site access, can I also just ask you to take up CD 2.20, Mr. Price, and just explain what's been done at Appendix B?
Yeah, sorry, could you just clarify exactly what CD...
Of course, 220.
Which document is that? Sorry, 'cause I'm just working...
Oh, I see. It's your response to the Highway Authority in August 2023.
Got you. Let me just work my way backwards. Apologies. August 23, yes. And is there a particular part of that response that you'd like me to look at?
I just want you to go to Appendix B and just explain what that is and what is it telling us.
Appendix B. Right. Okay. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the calculation of the vertical alignment of the carriageway and how visibility would interact with that. So the plan or the window frame on the left is the topographical data acquired from the site. Effectively, it's contouring of Wyreston Road, and we can see the various levels, intervals there. If you take a section of that then, which is what we see in the window to the right, that is Wyreston Road in section. The pink line above that then represents the required length of visibility taken from the point of the proposed access to where effectively 43 metres would terminate towards the south on Wyreston Road. And the notable point there really is that the pink line, which is the visibility display, does not conflict with the sort of the darker dotted line, which is the existing carriageway alignment.
That plan's in your proof as well, isn't it?
I believe it is, yes. Yeah.
And just turning for a moment back to the latest edition of the transport assessment that was submitted. So I have that as CD 2.17, but you will know it, and Mr. Price, as the TA version 3, dated August 2023.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want you to go to your appendices, and I'm afraid there aren't page numbers, but it's Appendix E.
Yep.
Obviously, we know that there's no challenge as to the actual visibility display being either the calculation or that it actually can be met from Mr. Carey, at least. But can you just explain what Appendix E does, particularly with respect to the calculator
Of course. So Appendix E is made up of two parts, really. The first part is the results of the automatic traffic count survey that was undertaken, pneumatic tubes laid for a 7-day period, calculating the number of vehicles and the speed of vehicles, amongst other things, including classification. That data is then used to derive what an 85th percentile speed would be in both locations. And the 85th percentile speed is then inputted into the second part of the appendix, which is a rather mind-blowing series of numbers and values and mathematical equations. But what that effectively represents is the accepted Manual for Streets calculation tool for calculating visibility. It takes into account principally the percentage of heavy goods vehicles. It takes into account the 85th percentile speeds of vehicles, and it also takes into account reaction times and bonnet lengths as well. Ultimately, when you put the numbers into the calculation tool, it gives you a stopping sight distance, a bonnet-adjusted stopping sight distance, and that's what's commonly referred to as a required visibility display. So in effect, we've got a visibility display northbound, giving us 42.7 metre, and a visibility southbound 58.36. Which is the bottom of that orange table, effectively.
Yeah. The black box, but not the one on the plane, yeah. I've already had too much coffee. One was too much. Sorry, Mum.
Now that we've gone there.
Yeah.
So in the black box, so we've got 42.71 and 58.36.
Mm-hmm.
Those are how far you can see.
That's how far you need to see in order to achieve visibility. You can actually see beyond those distances in both directions, but in order to comply with design requirements set out by Manual for Streets, and indeed address the comments raised by Derbyshire County Council in the highway roll capacity. This is the work that was undertaken, and then you plot those distances onto the plans. You use a 2.4 metre setback distance from a proposed giveaway line, and that gives you the extent of the visibility envelope.
Okay, so 42 is that northbound?
That's southbound to the right.
Right.
The reason you see a discrepancy between the northbound flows and the southbound flows is actually just the speed of vehicles observed as part of the ATC. Vehicles travelling north on Wyston Road towards the proposed site access were doing little over 30 miles an hour. Notwithstanding the fact it is a de-restricted speed limit zone, the actual speeds are very low. Ironically, the opposite is true for vehicles travelling south. They're coming out of a 30 zone and they begin to accelerate potentially towards the de-restricted area.
Right.
So consequently, you need to see further up the road than you do down the road.
I see. And so just to marry that all up, so these yellow boxes are saying you need to see 42 metres northbound and you need to see 58 metres southbound. And then the visibility display that we've got does that respond to that?
It does.
Yeah. So what visibility displays have you achieved on the plan?
Again, so in a southbound direction, we can see 42.7 metres plotted. In a northbound direction, we see 58.4 metres plotted.
Okay, just show me on P1045.
Okay, so I'm looking at the drawing there. So it is the top
I
right
see
window,
it,
proposed site access. It's the green dashed line.
And the box,
which is
2.4 times 58.
That's correct.
And 2.4 times 40.7.
That's right.
Okay,
The 2.4 there, Ma'am, refers to the setback distance from the proposed giveaway line. Again, take into account a bonnet length.
So that's essentially where you've got your visibility display from?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of follow-up questions on that, Mr. Price. So obviously you explained that the visibility display is what we're required to achieve. It's not actually how far you can see. How far can you see in the contentious direction, shall we say?
Okay, so again, this was confirmed through on-site measurements, which were undertaken and as evidence as part of the rebuttal I prepared. Effectively, acceptable visibility falls away at about a distance of 53 metres to the south. Again, the way that is measured is because from the point of origin, the visibility needs to be no lower than 1.5 centimetres, again reflecting the height of an eye line if you sat in the car. To the point of termination.
Sorry, just in terms of what's the point of origin?
Where where you're looking from, effectively. So a driver in a car, their eye line is typically no lower than just over a metre. So you're not. If you sat higher up, you get a greater level of elevation, which would give you an advantage potentially, particularly in a scenario like this. So we've taken the driver's visibility point is quite low to the ground. The minimum requirement, the maximum distance from the ground that you're allowed effectively, and then the point of termination where the visibility ends is 60 centimetres above the ground, and that's a representation within Manual for Streets of a small child effectively. Again, 60 centimetres off the ground, something circa this. Again, quite a conservative approach if you think about approaching vehicles, for example, which is what you might more commonly expect. So if you take just over a metre from the proposed access point and 60 centimetres to the right down Wyeston Road, the point where the crest conflicts with that visibility is about 53 metres.
Photos reflect that.
We've not included that, the maximum achievable visibility. Again, not wanting to conflate the points, to be honest, Mark.
Was that just demonstrated the plan?
It was more a direction for our team when they're on site to see what does 42, 43 metres look like, but also how far can you go before the crest interferes.
Let's make a point, because I don't. I was going to have to pick that up because I don't think there is any evidence on that. So, and it's obviously not something that Mr. Carey was asked about. So it's something on which we can't comment. But I just note there is no. The actual evidence isn't in front of the inquiry.
What in respect of the maximum?
The maximum,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can just take that as.
That's what you understand.
What
Yeah.
I've been told.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you were here for Mr. Carey's evidence, Mr. Price, and before we move off problem 2, and I appreciate we're taking a bit of time with this, but I think it's important. We had an exchange, Mr. Carey and I, about additional visibility, extra visibility. I'm going to raise it now, although it's not directly referenced in problem 2. It comes slightly later. But if you just keep that point in your mind, and you've already advised the inquiry about the differences in speed in the two directions that we've looked at in the visibility calculator. Can I understand this? What effect does topography have on speed? And if you're travelling towards the site access up the road, so the site access is on your left, so you are going north, you are going to Ashbourne. Mm-hmm. In terms of what you can or can't see, how, if at all, does that interplay with speed?
Yeah, so the impact of topography I would include along other highway characteristics such as carriageway width, features, signage, for example. Those are all cited as variables which could impact on drivers' perception of the carriageway in front of them and therefore speed as a result. Manual for Streets, both 1 and 2, talk about and promote the idea of actually over-engineering highway environments can actually have adverse impacts on speeds in that they encourage speed. So where the evidence is that where drivers have an element of uncertainty about what's ahead of them, their actual responses tend to be to slow down rather than speed up. In this particular instance here then, travelling north on Wyeston Road, approaching the proposed site access, we would suggest the observed speeds of just over 33 miles an hour as an 85th percentile is a direct reflection of the fact that the carriageway is comparatively narrow compared to current design standards. There is planting on both sides of the carriageway, and to an extent there's an element of unsighting about what's coming ahead.
And what does that do to speeds on the information you have available?
It would suppress speed.
And that point's borne out by your traffic surveys?
Absolutely.
So if we can just go back to problem 2, so I know we've taken quite a long way around it. Just in terms of, I want to understand your view and characterisation of what's been said to be a problem. So obviously it goes on further underneath the photographs. We see a reference to warning signs being just about visible, and stationary vehicles from 105 metres would be very visible. There's reference to foliage, and then we see the recommendation about, and it says all of the foliage from the next nearest southern access up to the location of the proposed junction should be removed, together with any new proposed landscaping. What's your response to whether or not that's necessary, and or whether or not, in your view, the problem 2 indicates that there is any safety issue that would lead the inspector to justifiably refuse the appeal?
Okay. Within the assessment work and calculation of visibility space we've provided, there is an element of vegetation which requires clearing. Again, the extent of that vegetation is included within the proposed access layout drawings. One of the points...
sorry, so you say it's in the proposed access drawings, so
Yes.
is it the drawing you've previously gone to?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So basically, if there is existing planting within the visibility envelope, if you like, so between that green dotted line and the edge of the carriageway, that would be considered to conflict with the visibility display required. So effectively any vegetation that lies between the green dotted line and the edge of the carriageway needs to be removed and maintained in order to achieve and maintain an acceptable level of visibility. As I mentioned when I summarised my thoughts on this AMI RSA, the imagery or the figures here, 2.2 -2 and 3, are misleading, I think, in my personal opinion, because they haven't overlaid the required visibility display onto those images, and resultantly suggested that quite large areas, I would suggest, of existing vegetation would need to be required in order to achieve a level of visibility and address the problem raised as part of 2.
Yeah, sorry to interject. Do tell me if it's throwing you off.
Not at all, ma'am.
But presumably, just in my experience, but please correct me, that's something that could be conditioned in terms of maintaining that visibility display.
Very commonly, yes.
And just for efficiency, I'm not sure I saw that in the draft conditions, but is it Mr. Bassett?
It is, ma'am.
You're probably best. Is it there?
I would need to check, Ma'am, but I think you might be right. I don't think it is. So
perhaps if we just make a note to add that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So just to conclude then, what's your position as to whether or not this problem 2, is something that would lead you to conclude that there is a safety issue that cannot be addressed?
No, it is not. If we were the design, well, given that Hexer are the designer, if we were preparing a design response to receipt of this particular RSA, that would be a problem that we would demonstrate has been addressed through the calculation of visibility displays and maintenance of head road to provide ongoing visibility.
Thank you. And so you did mention that in respect of the AMI RSA, they hadn't overlaid the drawings, so they've not sort of done the job of putting the topo on and then looking what the vis display is and then seeing how much vegetation that relates to. That's, I think, what you think you told us. Is that fair? Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, it is.
It's a bit of a trite question, but I think from what you've already told us, but just so there's no doubt, have you done that exercise, Mr. Price?
We have, yes.
Thank you. So moving on to problem 3 then, please. And this is where the extra visibility distance is referenced. So again, if you can just give us your view on your response to the problem that's been indicated here, and also in particular explain your view on extra visibility.
Sure. So the nature of the problem is, again, linked to perceptions within this particular RSA about limited visibility, and indeed the impact of that on potential pull-out collisions. So,
and sorry, just when you say perceptions of visibility, just explain in what way, if at all, is that different from actual visibility displays being achieved? Is there a distinction?
Well, it's my interpretation of how the RSA has been undertaken, to be fair. What I've not observed within the AMI RSA is evidence that they have used OS data or topographical data to measure required visibility. For the reason that Mr. Carey gave yesterday, the imagery included within the RSA is taken from moving vehicles, so that makes it difficult for the audit team to accurately calculate what the required visibility is, as opposed to a perception of required visibility.
Thank you. Please do go on with the rest of your explanation.
Okay, so again, the issues raised as part of problem 3 relate to visibility to the south, the potential impact of the crest and visibility, generally speaking. The response that we gave to problem 2 would carry, in my mind, to problem 3 as well, in that visibility has been calculated and found to be acceptable. You asked specifically about extra visibility. That's not a term I've come across before. We've not read guidance or been led by Derbyshire County Council to provide an element of extra visibility. So I struggle to explain what that might be, I'm afraid.
With respect to manual for streets too, Mr. Price, does that help us at all in understanding whether extra visibility is something that we should be looking for or not?
No, to be honest with you. So from the work we've done historically and where we stand in now, there's no design guidance requirements that specifies the provision of extra visibility. Within manual for streets 1 and 2, as I mentioned earlier, there are studies that make reference to over-engineering highway configurations and accesses and layouts, and those studies conclude that by providing something perhaps like you say is extra visibility, that would actually encourage speed and therefore could potentially result in a worsening of highway safety. So in that regard, I'm not sure that the provision of extra visibility would be beneficial. There's a potential for it to be a disbenefit.
Thank you. And just at this point, actually, I think it might be helpful to just pick up the RSA that's in your proof, which is Annex A. So it's the main proof of evidence. So just have that in mind. And then can you also, sorry, I know I'm asking you to have about 3 documents open at once. I know you're working on a laptop and you are also to some extent, Ma'am. But also if we can go to IQ5 and Appendix B, I just want to understand what something's telling us. So page 31,
Sorry, Ms. Ogley, IQ5 is also known as...
It's the GG119.
Ah, okay, thank you.
So just have a look at table B.1 and just address your mind to it's the second row and the second column under stage 2, and it's talking about new and existing road interfaces. That's the sort of the bold, as it were, there.
I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So just in terms of what this document tells us, what does it recommend or indicate needs to be considered where a road environment changes, e.g. urban to rural?
Let's take a moment to read it.
Of course.
Okay. And are you referring to the stage 1 section of new existing road interface, or stage 1, 2 and 3?
So I'm looking at stage 2, so it's the second row, the second column.
Where a new road scheme joins an existing road?
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, it's 31. So the question is, when we're talking about road environment changes, and it gives an example, e.g. urban to rural, restricted to unrestricted, what is that directing us to have regard to?
Well, it talks about the changing character, principally, and under the stage 2 road safety audit process, is the transition appropriate through signage and carriageway markings? So is there a change in character that drivers can perceive effectively, is my interpretation.
So, I mean, in your rebuttal, Mr. Price, you disagree with the characterisation of the stage 1 road safety audit in your evidence. So we've already got that in your rebuttal. I'm not going to take you to it and go over that. But just bearing in mind what we've just looked at in IQ5 and problem 1 in the road safety audit at your Appendix A, can you just give your view give your response, please, as the designer to that issue, please.
Yeah, of course. Let me just bring up problem 1. Bear me a moment. Okay, so within the road safety audit, which is appended to my proof, there is one problem. Problem 1, summary lack of awareness of the junction, risks junction pull-out collisions. It talks about visibility being achievable, but then cites the problem in regards to lack of awareness. Effectively, the development proposals would change a part of the character of that existing road. Recommendations from the RSA go on to potentially introduce a change of the speed limits, extending the 30-mile-an-hour zone, or other gateway features that provide a commentary to drivers that there is a change in environment. Our response to that is not necessarily to contest, to be honest with you, but actually to suggest, as part of the communication we have with Derbyshire County Council, that these are detailed design matters that would be addressed as part of the Section 278 process, which is typically when a Stage 2 road safety audit needs to be provided to accompany the detail of the design. So things like some of the road markings, the location of additional signage, those sorts of features.
Mr. Carey yesterday was careful in saying that he couldn't possibly assess whether or not providing additional signage to provide a gateway approach was possible. What's your view on whether or not that is likely to be achievable as the designer of the scheme, Mr. Price?
Yeah, well, I've personally not come across a situation yet when it's not achievable. But taking on board the points raised by Mr. Carey previously about the extent of the planting and the foliage potentially causing conflict, there are other ways to achieve gateway features. One typically might be to introduce dragon's teeth or little white painted triangles on the side of the carriageway. You could also introduce other painted features on the carriageway itself, like a 30 mile an hour speed limit or other indicators that suggest there is a change of character coming. So I would suggest that combined with an extent of hedgerow cutting back in order to provide the required visibility display would create that gateway approach. To be honest, though, it's something that we would typically expect to discuss and be led by Derbyshire County Council at the Stage 2 RSA point.
Hey, can I just clarify, Ms. Ogley? So just where we are, so we were looking at problem 3, which I think you're saying is similar to your problem 1. Yeah. And your solution, so you're acknowledging there is a problem with potentially a problem with vehicles travelling north, seeing this new exit entrance, and you're talking about you could overcome this later at design stage with gateway features, yeah?
That's right, ma'am.
Just where I sit, if I wanted to be happy that actually happened rather than leaving it to someone else, the control freak that I am, is there any way we could control that?
Absolutely. So in similar situations in the past, we have seen pre-commencement conditions along the lines of no works on site can be commenced until an acceptable access proposal has been submitted and approved by the local highway authority. That would inherently include features that might obviously include gateway treatments. For the point of clarity, really, it's probably worth pointing out that we haven't really been able to bottom out these points with Derbyshire County Council to date, because during the application determination process, they reviewed our proposals and raised no comment or point of concern about it. It is primarily in response to the refusal and subsequent evidence that we've received as part of the appeal that we've undertaken the process of additional highway safety analysis through the road safety audit. We have responded and shared this information with Derbyshire County Council, but I suspect given the nature of the appeal, they've not been able to respond.
Yeah, I understand that. So there is scope that I could put a condition that says something along the lines of, we're going to agree how we're going to provide gateway treatment to this new access, such as moving 30 mile an hour sign or dragon's teeth and so forth, to be agreed, and then
That's my understanding,
yeah.
ma'am, yes.
Okay, Mr. Bassett, again, could you make a note of that for the draft conditions? Thank you.
I think you can safely put away your Appendix A to your main proof. If you want to close a document down, I don't know.
I'll keep them open for now, just in case.
Just in case. Okay, so then let's just wrap up on problem 3. What is your position as to whether or not the problem identified by Amy gives rise to any safety issue that would mitigate against the grant of permission in this case?
So my understanding is that the problem 3 within the Amy RSA talks about a potential problem, but through the detailed design work, that potential has not materialised into an actual problem. Notwithstanding that, I think we need to separate visibility from perception. Okay, visibility is achievable, perception is a behaviour trait, and obviously there is something that can be done to address the perception of an expectation of a changing character in the area. So to that extent, I accept that some of the points within the AMI RSA are valid and can be addressed through detailed design as part of the Stage 2 work. But the fundamentals of the RSA suggesting that visibility is not achievable is something that we don't agree with.
Sorry, just to round that point off. So the reason why we wouldn't be relocating our access is because you're basically saying in the detailed design we could do enough to overcome that perception problem.
Yeah, it doesn't need to, frankly, Ma'am.
Okay.
Again, just to be absolutely clear on this, I mean, you've just explained about the difference between actual visibility requirements and perception, and you said that perception was about influencing driver behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of safety issues for highways assessments, Mr. Price, can I understand what's your view between the relative importance of actual visibility displays and whether or not they can be achieved, and perception of influencing driver behaviour? How does that relate to whether or not there is a safety issue here that would mitigate against the grant of permission?
Sure. Potentially it's a really expansive answer. I'll try not to provide one of those. The core principle that we adhere to is technical compliance achievable. When I refer to technical compliance, I talk about visibility displays which are accepted and calculated within the methodology provided by Manual for Streets 1 and 2, and then ultimately reviewed and authorised by the Highway Authority. Perceptions, and to finalise that point, yes, the answer is that they can be achieved. So there's a technical compliance in terms of visibility requirements. Perceptions is something a bit trickier, to be honest with you. There is often, we find, with regards to all schemes we get involved in, perceptions of poor highway safety. That is one thing that we're often asked to investigate, and in doing so look at various sources. One source which we've heard about already and Mr. Carey has considered and responded to is the absence of any personal injury accident data. So again, as part of the standard process for preparing a transport assessment, through the local highway authority, we contacted Derbyshire Constabulary, and at the time we requested 5 years worth of personal injury accident data for the surrounding area, and that would have been in 2022 when the original transport assessment was prepared. The response from the constabulary is that on Wyston Road there were no reported incidents. In updating our work and the evidence as part of this appeal process, we then went back to Derbyshire Constabulary to make sure that between 2022 and today, effectively, there have been no reported incidences. And again, the answer was the same: there are no reported incidents. I was listening carefully to the evidence provided by Mr. Carey, and to an extent, I would agree that the lack of PIA data on its own does not necessarily say that there won't be a problem in the future, because he's quite right in saying that there is no access there. There are no additional movements on the network now that can be observed. And to that point, we agree. But what we do typically is use a number of assessment tools to try and deliver and arrive at a rounded conclusion. So the availability of PIA data showing incidents or otherwise is one of the factors. The opportunity to achieve visibility, an adoptable level of visibility, is another. And again, engagement with the Highway Authority is a third. So whilst PIA data on its own wouldn't necessarily say that the access would be safe, it's quite a strong indicator to suggest that all the other information we provided on top of PIA means that there would not be adverse or unacceptable safety issues resulting from the proposals.
Thank you. And obviously there's quite a bit of overlap, I think, between problem 3, 4 and 5 in the AMI RSA, but again, just to make sure that we've got a complete response, can you deal with what's your response as the designer to problems 4 and problems 5?
Okay.
I mean, split them out if you think you need to, Mr. Price.
Okay, so problem 4, summary. Visibility to the right is severely restricted by vertical alignment of the carriageway, potentially causing side impact type collisions, as the speed limit is 60 miles an hour. I would not accept that problem. We've already demonstrated that the visibility is not obstructed by the crest. And whilst the speed limit may be 60 miles an hour, 85th percentile speeds are 33 miles an hour. Therefore, the recommendation to change the speed limit further south to lower the approach speeds is a potential sensible response to that. But again, studies undertaken and summarised with the Manual for Streets demonstrate that a change in speed limit typically reduces 85th percentile speeds by 1 or 2 miles per hour. Actually, a more effective way of reducing and controlling speed are gateway features. So I would suggest actually some form of surface treatment would provide a better form of driver awareness and speed reduction than a change in the posted speed limit on that section. So in a nutshell, that we would respond in that manner, not accept the problem. Problem 5, existing street furniture.
Sorry,
Apologies.
So it's saying the 30 mile an hour speed limit should be relocated south, such as where the golf club is. So I'm just trying to locate the golf club. Is that much further south?
It is quite, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, the risk potentially is that if you extend the 30 mile zone too far into what might be defined as the rural character area to the south of Ashbourne, that actually drivers approach lose confidence that they're within a changed character area, because they'll see the 30 mile an hour speed limit but won't actually encounter any physical change in character, and therefore potentially just continue driving at an unaltered speed, which is why the evidence suggests that gateway features provide a better speed reduction measure than, in this instance, perhaps an extension of the 30 mile an hour speed limit would.
So the golf club, is that the other side of the where the A52 goes over?
Yes.
It's further south than that, is it? Okay. So when we were talking earlier about a possible 30 mile an hour sign, where is it currently?
It is currently very close to where the proposed access is actually due to be sited. It does appear in some of the AMI RSA photos, actually.
Yeah.
So in problem 4, I think, is that the sign shown, Mr. Price, 3241?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we might be talking about moving it
Circa 100
just
metres.
slightly. Yeah. Okay. Just let me make a couple of notes of everything you've said
Sure.
there.
So is there anything else you want to say on problem 4?
No.
So problem 5 then, please.
Okay, so problem 5 focuses on street features and the potential they pose to hindrance on visibility and manoeuvrability around the junction.
Sorry, just for a second. When we're talking about street features, can you just be a bit more specific? What is it? What is that being? What's entailed in that in this particular instance?
Okay, yeah. So in this particular instance, it is signage, warning signage, and also highlighted is a drainage gully. at the edge of the carriageway. So photo 2.51 quite neatly provides evidence of those features that are, I guess, the focus of this point. The suggestion that the speed limit, the warning signage in this instance could have struck visibility, strictly speaking, is not one that we would accept, given that a post is not considered to interfere with the visibility envelope itself. And again, within Manual for Streets, it talks about visibility envelopes and what may or may not conflict or obscure those, specifically giving examples of posts.
Just on that point, is there a particular part of Manual for Streets 2 that you want to draw attention to?
I can't think specifically to the reference number. Apologies to the page section. I do have the document here in front of me. However,
I think we're at CD. What CD are we for Manual for Streets 2? Sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the document.
It just says slow on the road. Is that because we're entering Ashbourne?
I would assume so, yes. I mean, I wasn't personally involved in that feature design, but I would
Just
assume it's the
surmising.
case. Yeah, I would assume. Yeah, but an example of a gateway feature, nonetheless.
Sorry, can I just be clear about that? Is that not heading south rather than into Ashbourne? So it's not signalling, it's for the bend and the crest.
Yes.
Where is this 2.5 to 1? So that's heading south, away from the access.
Is where the sign is basically, more or less.
Oh,
I think Mr. Price is nodding. The site access is more or less where the existing signage is.
oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so apologies, I wasn't looking at the photo when you made the references to slow. But yes, the painted slow road marking in photo 2.51 is a warning to drivers leaving Ashbourne and would be in response to the gradient that they're about to encounter.
Right, okay.
But notwithstanding that, an example of something that could be repeated on the northbound side of the carriageway potentially.
Thank you, Mr. Price. So we were just about to potentially go to MFS2, but I'm not sure if you've had a chance to find the section. We don't necessarily need to turn it up. If you want to just carry on with an overview, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm looking at MFS2. And to be fair, MFS 1 and 2 make references to good design and practice, basically, and they cite numerous examples with which we have given consideration and discussed with Derbyshire County Council as the Highway Authority in securing their support for the proposals. So problem 5, excuse me, yes, we were talking about problem 5. Again, the issues raised here as problem 5 typically would be addressed as part of a detailed design process. The location of warning signage, in this instance the gradients, and the gully particularly as well, would form part of a detailed package of Section 278 technical drawings submitted to the Highway Authority for approval and then subject to a Stage 2 road safety audit. So the gully would relate to highway drainage, and the signage would be reaccommodated subject to the discretion of the Highway Authority. So again, not problems that are insurmountable or would warrant a conclusion that there are unacceptable highway safety risks. Problem 6 would be considered to fall...
Sorry, just bear with me one moment.
Apologies.
So I don't think you actually, without turning up the paragraph of what MFS2 says, and you were starting to talk about, I think it was the envelope of visibility and and how that relates to street furniture.
Yes.
Can you just what does it say about that relationship?
Okay, so specifically Manual for Streets talks about calculating and interpreting visibility, and it describes an envelope. So whilst our plans, when we calculate visibility, are based on straight lines from point A to point B, it's that green dotted line, that would suggest that visibility is a narrow vision field, and potentially anything within that, along that line, would be considered to obscure visibility, and therefore you can't achieve visibility. Manual for Streets directs us away from that approach, and it presents visibility as an envelope. So it's a perception of field of view. Apologies. And what that also then makes reference to specifically is that to an extent, trees, if it's simply a narrow tree trunk, or they also specifically reference street posts or speed posts along these lines, if they fall within the envelope, would not be considered to significantly interfere with a reasonable level of visibility. So I guess the point of that is that one warning sign or a couple of warning signs within the envelope of visibility are not considered to constitute a negative impact.
Thank you. And just bearing that in mind, again, Mr. Price, so what's your response as the designer to problem 5?
We would not accept that as a problem that needs an immediate design response for the purposes of a planning application. We would respond to that particular problem that these measures will be designed and detailed as part of 278 and agreed as part of a road safety audit, stage 2.
Finally then, problem 6.
Problem 6, comparable in many ways to problem 5, however, it relates to internal site design features as opposed to external design features. It's not something that we would consider as having a severe detrimental impact on highway safety. It is something that would be developed and detailed as required with highway engineers from Derbyshire County Council as part of a Section 38 adoptions agreement. Probably also worth highlighting that amongst the extensive discussions and negotiations we had with Derbyshire Highways, the specific design, placement and location of the traffic calming features were very much delivered in direct response to their request and requirements. So problem 6, photos 2.61 and 2.62 relate to build-outs or traffic calming features. So effectively they've been included and designed as per the direction of Derbyshire County Council.
Sorry, just going back to the 3 options that a design response has, so which one of the 3 would you be adopting for problem 6?
We do not accept this as a problem at this stage of the design process, and detailed design considerations would be undertaken as part of a stage 2 road safety audit. So we would effectively move that to the next stage of design.
Mal, I'm just conscious that it's 20 to 12. I don't know whether or not you're looking to have a break now before I move on to the next topic with Mr. Price.
So that topic was site access.
That topic was road safety audit, I think, probably in response. And access and visibility.
Access, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Main point of access and safety. So I think in the main there were 2 other points for us to deal with Mr. Price. The next one was probably accessibility, and then the final one is about the assessment of the 5-way junction.
Yep. Becoming familiar. Okay. I think, see if this works. If we take just a comfort break and then do accessibility. And then if people need lunch, we could break then, but then see how we go. It depends how swiftly we move on. All right.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Sorry that's taken a little while, but it's good
Not at all.
to look at these problems individually and pragmatically see what your responses are. Okay. All right. Should we just come back at 10:02?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Might be 40 minutes, ma'am, but only because I'm just conscious about this point on the junction.
Okay, so if we sort of work towards about 12:30 or just after,
Yes, ma'am.
and then we can break for lunch and come back for cross-examination. All right.
Absolutely. So moving away from issues about access and safety, visibility displays, so on and so forth, onto accessibility, please. And can I just get you to provide an overview of what's your position on the accessibility and sustainability of this site, please?
Okay. Well, through our undertaking of the transport assessment, review of the site and surrounding amenities and infrastructure to support sustainable travel, we ultimately concluded that there are reasonable and viable opportunities to travel sustainably and access local services and amenities sustainably.
And in respect of that conclusion now, reasonable and viable opportunities, what did you take into account when reaching that view, Mr. Price, in terms of either the physical features of the site, the physical features of the surrounding area, and where those facilities are located, and also, aside from walking or cycling, whether there are any other modes of transport that might be available other than the private car?
Sure. So when we undertake an assessment of accessibility and opportunities to travel by sustainable modes of transport, we'll obviously know where the origins are. It is, in this instance, the proposed site development, but then also we're looking at the destinations. So if we take the modes in turn, if you like, travel by public transport principally refers to bus in this particular location. We looked at the nearest bus stops, the distances to those bus stops from both the proposed site access, but also from deeper within the proposed residential development as well. I mean, it does have that elongated characterisation whereby, residents inhabiting properties to the western side of the development would have a longer walk and journey time than those living in properties to the east. Probably worth adding as well at this point that when undertaking this assessment, we did not include for the footpath that would have connected to the Premier Avenue as well. So all of our assessment work and figures within transport assessment, and indeed subsequent evidence and rebuttals, are on the basis that the only access for vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists is proposed site access onto Wyeston Road. But notwithstanding...
Just to pause there for a second. So this is the foot. So you didn't take the footpath into account. That's now basically not being proposed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't want to be finicky, but page 30 of your proof, table 5.6, are you taking into account the footpath there?
We did in that particular table. That was a point of demonstration, really. The idea behind that information was to try and convey the message that with or without the footpath, there isn't a significant difference if you looked at the general accessibility of the range of services and amenities. So in principle, whilst I would agree, the more permeable a site becomes, generally, the more accessible and better it would be. But in this particular instance, we were looking at, well, with or without the footpath, there isn't what we'd consider a demonstrable impact on our conclusions in regard to accessibility.
And just with respect to that, can you just pick up the end of paragraph 5.53?
Yes, bear with me a moment, sorry. This is in our evidence 553.
Yeah, that's fine, ma'am. Yeah, we can move on from that. Don't worry, Mr. Price.
Okay.
You were telling us that in terms of your assessment and the conclusions you've reached, you've not relied on Premier Avenue, and obviously that table was there to just show what, if anything, that would make a difference to. So can you move on then to tell us more about what you've taken into account on destinations, bus availability?
Yeah. Sure. So yeah, I mean, in summary, we look at the distances to the travel nodes or the key attractors, schools, GPs, cafes, shops, convenience stores, etc. But we also look at the quality of the route to those particular destinations as well. So in theory, it's all well and good having a bus stop just 200 metres from a site, but if you've got to cross a 4-lane motorway to get there, it's almost useless. So we look at the travel distances and the quality of the routes from the site to those particular destinations and travel nodes. Then taking public transport specifically into account, we look at the frequency of the services, the quality of the services, and if it presents opportunities to interchange nearby as well. So in this particular instance, the nearest bus stop has a fairly limited service, perhaps one commensurate with the town and the location, but an hourly service nonetheless. What it does do, though, is actually provide a connection to the town centre. So if one is not able to walk or cycle to the town centre, potentially they could catch the bus and interchange in the town centre, wherein there are further public transport travel opportunities. From a cycle perspective, we look at Sustrans mapping information, Derbyshire Highways, adopted map routes approved and suggested for cycling, and we see what the quality and the viability of those routes are like. And then internally, we advise the broader design team as to what constitutes an environment within the proposed development itself, which is conducive to walking and cycling. So low traffic speeds, wider footways, traffic calming measures, etc. So upon undertaking that assessment in its entirety, and again liaising with Derbyshire Highways as the highway authority, we arrive at the conclusion that there are reasonable opportunities to travel by sustainable modes.
A specific point's been taken, Mr. Price, about the internal topography of the site and the footpaths within the site. Can you just explain, give your response, please, to that?
Sure. So my thoughts in response to that particular issue that's been raised is it's difficult to draw conclusions without Section 38 drawings that have specifically considered the exact detail of the topography. The site does generally fall from the north to the south direction, but actually the direction of travel for pedestrians and cyclists is one of east to west. So it's running with the gradient as opposed to across it. That gives me confidence that, well, certainly, DDA compliant and policy compliant in respect of Derbyshire County Council's design requirements are achievable. But, the specific conclusion it can or can't be achieved, I can't arrive at without those detailed drawings. But notwithstanding that, the evidence would suggest that, suitable levels are achievable.
There's been mention of a travel plan. Can you just talk us through what's being proposed with respect to the appeal site, with respect to travel planning?
Yeah. No,
and specifically, there was a comment in re-examination of Mr. Carey about the provision of information. Just take that into account, please, when you give your response.
Of course, Ms. Ogley. Yes, so as part of the validation requirements, but actually moreover as part of the request from Woodall Homes as our client in this instance, there was a genuine desire to promote the uptake of sustainable travel modes and create a community which maximises opportunities to travel sustainably. Through that then led to the preparation of a travel plan which accompanied the planning submission and again has been reviewed by travel plan officers at Derbyshire County Council in this instance, and we determined accepted because there was no objections raised. The travel plan document itself does propose more than some of the items that were raised in the re-examination earlier. The provision of welcome packs was cited specifically a little earlier this morning, and the question raised is whether the travel pack on its own would achieve a level of modal split which would generally be considered to be viable and make a difference? Would it constitute reasonable? And the information that was cited a little earlier on its own perhaps wouldn't, but what that didn't actually take into account was the travel plan document itself. Within the travel plan documents, there are a number of proposals which aim to promote the uptake of sustainable travel modes and reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles. They include free bus passes for residents. Within the design itself, the streets and the layouts are broadly aligned to LTM 120 environments which would support walking and cycling. There are welcome packs which include information about the nearest destinations, if you like, but also references to taxi companies, online retailers, local public transport services. I forget what else there were, apologies. But all in all, a range of measures and promotional activities, and indeed a management scheme for a period of no less than 5 years, which will monitor the effectiveness of the travel plan. So what I have seen in the preparation of my evidence to this inquiry is discussions around Section 106 contributions and a travel plan figure requested by Derbyshire County Council. That in itself is a tool, I understand, that would be available to support and supplement any failure to deliver the travel plan. So, I think ultimately I conclude that the travel plan that's been prepared, submitted and ultimately approved by Derbyshire County Council is considered as a tool which could achieve an acceptable level of mode shift.
In terms of the ongoing consultation, sorry, I think I'm assuming one of the windows is open. Which will probably need temperature. But it might well kill me in due course. No, don't worry, I'm just joking. It's just it's hay fever, that's all. With respect to the correspondence with the Highway Authority that you had during the application, was accessibility and sustainability an issue that was specifically engaged on?
It was.
And what was the outcome?
The outcome was twofold, really. In terms of the physical design of the site, the layout and the configuration, the outcome of those discussions was quite a protracted and in-depth review of the design features within the site, footways, build-outs, features to promote walking and cycling, which ultimately resulted in the proposals for the site as we see before us now. Externally, beyond the site boundary then, and looking at opportunities to maximise the use of sustainable travel within the area, it was the development and the review of the travel plan, the measures within the travel plan, and a commitment to ongoing travel plan delivery monitoring, which ultimately resulted in the final version of the travel plan. There was consideration specifically about travel distances to locations and transport nodes as well. And again, what we were able to do is present evidence within the transport assessment and a subsequent correspondence with Derbyshire County Council akin to what's been included in our my own evidence today, which ultimately led them to conclude that the scheme is acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I mean, rather than give just the general overview that you've provided there, Mr. Price, I mean, I don't think we benefit from going into too much detail. But just in terms of maximum walking distances, that's something that's been suggested by Mr. Carey. So could I get your response on that point? Are there maximum distances for walking? If they are, what are they, and what guidance supports that conclusion?
Sure. So the use of maximum walking distances is something that we try to avoid the use of. We may talk about average, we may talk about recommended, but maximum is not generally something that we tend to accept. It is an area which is quite convoluted, and various papers have looked into what average distances might be or what acceptable distances might be. But ultimately, we fall back here on Manual for Streets, which recommends that the use of maximum travel distances should not be applied on its own, and a wider appreciation of the quality of the destination, be it a public transport interchange, be it a convenience store, and the amenity of the route to that destination need to factor in as well. It also strongly recommends and leans on viable and reasonable opportunities, to that effect, suggesting that you can expect more in central London than perhaps you would, say, in a more rural community. So what is reasonable and reflective of the area itself? So taking that into the round, and again, in those discussions with Derbyshire County Council, we demonstrated a design compliance, and actually, moreover than compliance, genuine opportunities that could attract people away from their cars.
And just in your main proof of evidence, Mr. Price, I think you do have a section on planning policy, both the MPPF and the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, that deals specifically with highways matters, including accessibility. Can I understand your view? I mean, have you taken into account the position of Ashbourne in the settlement hierarchy? We have, yes. And how have you taken that into account? How important do you say that is to the issue of accessibility?
Well, in that regard, we take our lead from the statements of common ground, whereby the authority place themselves as the top tier in the settlement hierarchy in terms of accessibility and sustainability. They themselves identify the proposed development site as accessible, sustainable, and within 20 to 25 minutes walking distance of local amenities and services. So I would probably defer to others if you're asking for my categorisation on hierarchy when it comes to settlement. However, being led by the authority themselves in their assessment of hierarchy and what that then means for accessibility, we're largely leaning on the evidence that they've presented themselves.
Thank you. On accessibility then, because I want to move on to deal with this issue about highway assessment and the 5-arm roundabout. Is there anything else that you'd like to draw to the attention of the inquiry on accessibility matters before we move on?
I dare say it's going to be explored a little later on today. But what I would say, and to lead into what's probably going to follow a little bit later, it's been touched on already in terms of the use of maximum travel distances, averages, etc. The use of just one measuring tool to define what is or isn't accessible is tricky, and it's a point which is discussed greatly not just amongst transport planning and highway designers, but amongst planners and many people. So ultimately, we conclude through discussions and negotiations with Derbyshire about what is acceptable, what is proportionate and reasonable, and ultimately taking a body of evidence into account rather than one single item, would we arrive at a conclusion.
Thank you. So let's move on to deal with the 5-arm roundabout. Obviously, again, you've heard Mr. Carey's evidence on this, and I think we need to take up your rebuttal and your appendices to your rebuttal. try and make sure that we give the inquiry the information that it needs. If you go to your Appendix C, what does your Appendix C tell us about what you've taken into account with respect to the modelling that's been undertaken for this junction, please?
Okay.
Yeah, Appendix C of the rebuttal, yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. So, Appendix C in itself is an output of the Linsig modelling software. That is a tool which is commonly used to assess the operational efficiency of signal-controlled junctions, such as, in this instance, the 5-armed junction we're discussing at the moment. What that provides, Appendix C in its entirety provides the technical data that was utilised in terms of assessing a baseline traffic conditions, the signal timing, the highway geometry, the phasing of the red, green.
Okay, just slow these down a little bit.
Sorry.
Baseline traffic, what else? Phasing
yes.
of traffic lights.
That's right, one arm to the next, how long the green light is on, for example.
Yeah.
In this instance, also pedestrian phases.
Yeah. What else does it take into account?
Geometry.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, what we apply to that is also future growth with and without proposed development trips.
Now, Mr. Carey says, I've not had a chance to look at this, but I had a discussion with you, Mr. Price, and I don't have any basis for questioning the mode of assessment. But just a couple of points that were raised during Mr. Carey's evidence. The assessment that you've made in respect of traffic volumes, how much traffic is on the network, have you made any discount for the development traffic having regard to modal shift?
No, we've not.
What do you say that means in respect of the assessment process you've taken?
I would suggest this presents a robust modelling scenario.
Your table in the main rebuttal tell us that you have allowed for a growth. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you've used to factor in growth in the assessment, please?
Okay.
What that is? What comprises that growth in? I think it's Tempro.
It is, yes, yeah. So Tempro is a tool that is commonly utilised within the transport planning environment. It draws on a number of sources of data, effectively to create factors you apply to observed traffic flows in order to try and calculate what future traffic flows may appear to be or would actually look like. So in the instance here, Tempro results are broken down into different medium super output areas, local authority areas, planning districts, etc. So utilising the Derbyshire Dales District Council area and the Ashbourne area specifically, Tempro takes into a number of factors, including local plan allocated sites, future housing year targets, OBR statistics in terms of economic growth, both locally and within the wider region.
Yep.
Car ownership, demographics, a number of variables which could ultimately impact on car ownership, trip generation, and destinations.
Okay, and just with respect to the approach you've taken to this particular junction, were there any differences in the approach compared to what you adopted in the TA for the other junctions that you have assessed?
Ultimately, no. Notwithstanding the fact our original transport assessment considered the impact of development proposals as a future year of 2029. Following discussions with Derbyshire Highways Authority, they asked us to extend the future year to 2032, which corresponds with the end of the local plan period. The idea behind that effectively is to again provide a robust catch-all review of what future trip generation and growth might be like in the area, and to plot our development impacts upon that scenario. So in doing so, the approach to the 5-arm modelling that we've undertaken more recently is in line with how we were asked to update our modelling by Derbyshire County previously. So it projects 2032 as a future year scenario.
Just going back to the main rebuttal then, the actual rebuttal itself, not the appendices, let's just take up where you deal with this, please. Because obviously you've done two things. You've updated traffic count data in response to a concern raised by Mr. Carey. We'll come back to that, but that point's been conceded. That in effect the updated counts deal with the problem, is where Mr. Carey is. So secondly, you go on to assess this junction that Mr. Carey said needed to be assessed. Can I just get your view? What's your position on whether or not this was a necessary exercise?
Ultimately, we didn't feel it was necessary, a point substantiated by Derbyshire County Council not asking us to include it when they commented on the extent of our modelling work.
What did you take into account in reaching that view?
The level of trips that the proposed development would generate, how they are distributed across the network, and ultimately what anticipated level of additional traffic the surrounding junctions might experience as a part of the proposals. You mentioned in some of your cross earlier, Ms. Ogley, that the typically adopted approach, or one of the key factors that we take into account when we consider is it necessary to model a junction or not, is a calculation of will we see an increase of more than 30 two-way vehicle movements or not. When we did a trip generation exercise and distributed that across the network, we found a number of junctions would see an increase of more than 30 two-way movements. Those were the junctions that were shared and agreed with Derbyshire County Council and ultimately were assessed as part of the original transport assessment. The junction that we're looking at now, the 5-arm junction, would not experience an increase of more than 30 movements and therefore was not included as part of our scope of assessment or requested by Derbyshire County Council.
Okay, so I think from what you're telling the inquiry there is that the scope of the assessment, when the Highway Authority were deciding that, they had information from yourselves regarding the likely amount of traffic that would go to this junction. So they did that with knowledge. So to your table then, please, table 2.6. And I just want to explore this question with you. You use the term mean max Q. Obviously you were here for some questions to Mr. Carey on that this morning. Can you just explain what does that mean and how is it relevant to the robustness or otherwise of the assessment that you've undertaken?
Okay, so again, the table represents the executive output of Appendix C, if you like. Appendix C could be described as a lot of jargon. Table 2.6 arguably is the bit that counts, that most decision makers tend to focus on. The mean max Q could otherwise be described as a worst case scenario Q length. Whilst the use of the word mean does indicate average, it is immediately followed by maximum. So the average maximum, and it's a bit of a weird one. You'll have to ask the software designers about that. But notwithstanding that, we take that as a bit of a worst case.
And just with respect to the degree of saturation that's indicated at this junction in 2032. Firstly, I mean, how robust or otherwise do you consider a horizon year? So the end point of the assessment of the impact, how robust is 2032 as a horizon year?
Typically, I'd actually suggest it's over-robust. We presented 2029 as a future year modelling date, in line with the expectation of the build-out and occupancy of the proposed developments. When Derbyshire Highways asked us to extend the future year scenario to 2032, we were happy and willing to do so, more for their peace of mind than our own, perhaps. But it goes beyond what we would typically present.
Okay, and then to degree of saturation, then obviously we can see the figures. We don't need to go through them point by point, but can I just get your view and your advice to the inquiry on what that means for the operation of this junction?
Okay, in summary, the biggest change we see between in terms of the degree of saturation occurs as a result of natural growth. So the application of temporary growthing between 2024 and 2032 is what leads to the biggest increases in degree of saturation. Degree of saturation effectively being a measure of the capacity of the junction to accommodate vehicle movements. When we add proposed development trips, the final column, which is 2032 plus development, we see minor increases or negligible increases. Those would be expected because invariably the proposed development would create additional trips at this particular junction during peak periods, but the overall conclusion is that they are within acceptable tolerances.
Within acceptable tolerances, I mean, what sort of order of magnitude would an acceptable tolerance normally be? Okay,
so again, we've spoken about 90% as a threshold. It is typically accepted that a degree of saturation of 90% is where you tend to get you max out your optimum efficiency. Anything beyond 90% then starts to have almost more significant impacts on the efficiency of a junction. There are scenarios, and I've been involved in schemes in the past, whereby the going beyond 90% in itself does not necessarily dictate that it's an unacceptable impact. We see scenarios, for example, where junctions might already be operating beyond 90%, and then development proposals add to those, but to such a small degree that it's largely still imperceptible and also not proportionate to ask the scheme to then mitigate existing impacts or faults with that scenario. I appreciate I'm hypothecating, actually, apologies. But the conclusion is 90% is an accepted threshold, but it's not the ultimate deciding factor.
And in your view, having undertaken the additional work to respond to Mr. Carey's point, I mean, what's your position on whether or not there is any adverse impact from the development on this junction?
There is impact. I wouldn't describe it as adverse.
Why not?
Because the level of change doesn't result in breaching the 90% degree of saturation, and the difference between future year without development and future year with development, I would suggest, is negligible.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Is there anything else that you want to touch on with respect to the assessment of this particular junction?
Not particularly.
And before I hand you over for cross-examination, is there anything else more generally that you'd like to draw to the attention of the inspector?
I suppose one thing I'd like to do is just clarify again my position at this inquiry. When it comes to the work we've undertaken and the approach we've gone about this, we have provided a service to the appellant, but the service is in relation to design, assessment of impact, and advice on necessary mitigation where required. my duty, as we sort of mentioned in the introduction, is actually to the industry and to the transport planning professional and the organisations I'm a member of.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I think hopefully now we're 5 minutes slightly early. I'll take that. And so that concludes Mr. Price's evidence in chief.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ogley, and thank you, Mr. Price. But I think now's a good time just to give you a lunch break as well before cross-examination, because you have been on for a little while this morning. So can we take the hour and resume at 1:30? Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.